I was told my child would never speak without intervention, without getting an assessment, without having a therapist. And he needed it now. The quicker the intervention, the quicker he was going to speak. They kept saying, I was hounded to meetings. I kept saying no. Now I'm talking from a place and time in the future where I'm so glad I said no. I stuck to my guns, even with all the pressure, even with all the different voices telling me no, just do it. Why don't you want him to speak? And my issue with, I guess, my child at least, going down those paths of assessments or getting diagnosed with disorders, is that you often will become the disorder you're diagnosed with. We are our belief systems. If we get a label attached to us, especially when we're young and we're still growing, we don't know who we are, and we're sort of, flexing and trying new things. When we get labels slapped onto us, especially in those early years, we will simply then become them. If my child ever sort of caught on to the fact that, oh, I have to go to all these with different classrooms, meet these different people, do these different exercises because everyone thinks I can't speak, I can't speak, I can't speak. His belief system will be I can't speak. And the one thing I always want to protect with him, all children get challenges, and I believe that'll make them stronger. Don't wrap him in a bubble in any way. One thing I always want to protect and nurture is his sense of self-worth and self-esteem. I never let anyone, or him, especially him, think that he couldn't speak. And I think if you, especially when they're very young at 2 and they're still sort of forming, they're still learning, like, to try and force them to speak now, is detrimental. That's what my intuition was with my child anyway. I read this great book. It handheld me during those tough times when you're really feeling pressurized. You're like, oh, am I doing the right thing? I never really doubted. I just annoyed me that why people, especially teachers, are just constantly finding faults in children and trying to put pressure on them to maintain some sort of machine-like status quo. So this book was great. It's called The Einstein Syndrome by Thomas Sowell, Bright Children Who Talk Late. And so he kind of describes how a certain percentage of the male population speak late. And through a scientific lens, he describes how this part of the brain, which includes sort of everything about mathematics, engineering, music, that part of the brain is right next to the speech part. So when someone who is good in those areas, good at those subjects, so like Einstein was, particular, Thomas Edison, he lists loads of male inventors in particular, or musicians or mathematicians who all were so-called late talkers. And even the teachers back then tried to label them as disordered or stupid and all of that because they couldn't speak. And look what they end up doing later on in life. Just because they're not like everybody does not mean that they're disordered or they're stupid. They're just they're just thinking differently. That's all. That should be applauded and nurtured and rewarded. Not they shouldn't ever be made to feel like they're somehow disordered or different. And this is the reason I always said no. We become the belief systems that we apply to ourselves, and also what we allow others to slap on. So, especially if a child so young gets a label, they will often grow into that disorder, even though, at age 2, 3, 4, you have no idea like who they're going to become. Sometimes it's just they're growing in different ways, and 3/4 of the toddlers could be labelled with a disorder from how chaotically they act sometimes. It's just part of being a toddler. And then the obedient ones are no one bats an eyelid. Well, they're not the system breakers, though, are they? It's these new children who are showing up in different ways, rejecting the system, who are making teachers feel so uneasy that they need to slap some sort of disorder on them. So, I never wanted him to have the belief system that he couldn't speak. And I think if you go down have all those assessments, get the disorder, go to specific classes to help you to speak, you will start telling yourself you can't speak. And when I speak to other adults who had similar things happen in their childhood, I had to go and do this special reading class because I was told I couldn't read, they have forever carried on with that in adulthood, that they can't read or are not a good reader, because they went down those interventional paths. Whereas sometimes it just takes another child 2 or 3 years to get their groove in that area. Don't all have to, be on the same path, doing everything at the same time. It's so robotic, so unhuman. All got different gifts to add to the world. We can't be good at everything. And Rudolf Steiner was always the sort of pillar, the voice for that. He said, if a child shows exceptional ability in one area, undoubtedly, that a natural sort of, physical law would be that child would be weak in another area, because you can't have all these strengths in every single area. Life just doesn't work like that. So his second nursery was a Steiner kindergarten, which you'd think would be quite open-minded about this stuff, especially if Rudolf Steiner was the one who said this. And they, I think, were actually the worst at the beginning, worse than the mainstream school he's in now, were maybe worse than that first nursery. They were very, apprehensive. They kind of, when you go to these smaller private schools, I think they're a bit scared that they're going to get slapped on the wrist by Ofsted or something, and they've got to always be seen to be doing the right thing. I don't think mainstream schools have as much pressure, and mainstream schools generally have a broader range of different types of students, usually higher volume of students. They sort of see more, whereas these smaller private ones, they get very focused on picking out flaws, which is super annoying to most parents who send their kids to these type of schools, because that's not what they want at all. So they called me in for a meeting, the Steiner, because I'd already said no to speech therapy once before. And then they brought new people in to try and, I don't know, as if numbers could convince me. And they're like, this is why we think he needs to be intervened with. And then I showed them, I was like, read this book. This is what is going on with him. I asked them, have you seen how good he is with numbers? And they stared at me blankly. I said, well, in this book, this scientist, this guy, whoever he is, psychiatrist, he describes how in, a certain group of males, especially, some girls, who are really sort of show great promise with numbers, engineering, all of that stuff, how, their speech gets affected until about the age of 5. They hadn't heard of it, I don't think they read it, but they left me alone, and about 2 days later I get a message from his teacher, and she said, we put him in, so this is a kindergarten in Steiner, so they'll put the 3-year-olds with the 4 or 5, 6-year-olds, so they're not in a year group. They believe that in the early ages it's good for them to mix and match with different ages. So she said, we put him with, they did, and also in Steiner schools they do know formal learning with them. It's more about sort of gentle play and going outside, building stuff, imagination. They don't do any sort of maths or phonics or reading or anything like that until age 7. So, but they do gentle introduction to mathematics subject with the 6-year-olds. So after I showed her that book and I just told her about this, she then did something they don't usually do. He was 3 at the time. They brought him over to the group of 6-year-olds who were doing some gentle maths, and she said to me, he was better than every single 6-year-old. She couldn't believe how he knew all that stuff. And I said, you've been so focused on looking at the only fault that he's got, that you never noticed his strength. And there's a great quote. I read a great one. I mean, I just read it the other day. I don't even know who said it. Who said, if you've got a child who is failing in maths but great at tennis, what they would do, and what most people would do, is try and get a maths tutor. But he said, no, what you should do is get a tennis coach, because that's obviously what the child is good at. Pursue that. They don't like maths, they're not good at it. Work on the strengths. Yeah, you can dabble in the other subjects a little bit, so you've got a broad spectrum of different subjects, but really you I think and believe that you've got to let children do what they're passionate about doing. Then they'll find their way. This whole thing about trying to make children into robots, essentially, it's insane. And it's a high proportion of children now who have these so-called disorders. I don't believe are disorders. Are really here to mix up that system, to change it, to sort of make all of us adults realise that we can't keep diagnosing people who are different with disorders. Maybe they're not even different, maybe they're right. Maybe it's wrong that we were so obedient when they were children. Good on them for disrupting the status quo. Let's listen to them, because we didn't listen to ourselves when we were young. And so they left me alone after that, because they could see he was good at numbers. Now, I am not good at numbers at all. It kind of makes me feel sick when I have to, someone gives me a multiplication. And I've never done math. I never did maths with him. I never taught him maths. He somehow has come into this world with an ability to grasp sort of numbers and engineering sort of rules, physics. You can see that's really his strength. Now, he is constantly asking, Mum, do maths with me, do maths, and then I'm doing these sums. He's just getting them all. I have to use my calculator. So this is just what he's good at. And it was one of the reasons why he wasn't speaking when I guess the majority of other kids were speaking. It wasn't because he was disordered. It wasn't because there was something wrong with him that needed to be fixed by some therapist. It was because he was taking his time. Now, when he entered mainstream school and reception, who I found to be actually way more lenient, way more relaxed, listened to me more. And he was speaking at this point, but he lots of words were off with their pronunciation, mainly because I didn't correct him, because I just wanted him to speak and not have me randomly say, no, you gotta say it that way, no, you gotta say it that way. It's just okay, he's finding his voice. I'm not just going to correct him constantly, to let him say it how it's coming out. But it got to the stage where it's okay, well, maybe that could be tinkered with gently. He could learn how to pronounce better, and that would help him communicate with his friends. So yeah, I kind of gave in when he was at the age of 4.5, knowing that he's going to be on this waiting list for a year anyway, so it'd be 5.5 when they got to him, which is, I think, way more of an appropriate age for, I guess, someone like a speech therapist to come in, especially if it's just fine-tuning something. When you've got a child who isn't speaking at all, or 1 or 2 words, and then you've got someone trying to force it out, I don't think that's great, because it's obviously not a pronunciation issue. It's just something going on in the brain, or they're just not ready to speak yet. And if, in this book, Thomas Sowell says that it's actually very detrimental to children who are just destined to speak late. If you try and make them speak before they can speak, it's really, really hard on them. It gives them terrible anxiety, and their speech is worse. You lose words. It's just crazy. So lo and behold, when he's 5.5, then I get a phone call from a speech therapist. She'd done a half a day sort of assessment with him in the December, and then something happened. He had to go to his rehearsal or something for the school play. And then she could only come back in February, 2 months later. So she said to me, yeah, there were words off in December. No, he wasn't saying like the L in the middle of the word or something, and he was speaking in sentences, but there was just, the pronunciation. But she said then, well, when I came back in February, every single thing had self-corrected. Like that, it almost felt like fate then, that she'd had these weird. She's like, oh, I never do an assessment on split days. Usually, it's usually one, but just because he had this rehearsal, she had to do split days. And then she's given me proof that he self-corrected. Now, if he'd have gone for speech therapy somewhere, they'd have said, oh, look, speech therapy fixed him. And it didn't. It was he had, within the space of 2 months, managed to correct all his pronunciation issues without any intervention. And I've got the proof in the paperwork. She did these two sessions. And it was really like, it just felt like a victorious moment, because stress sometimes that you feel when you've got like your parent to a 2-year-old and everyone's telling you need to do something because it's the best thing for your child, and in your heart it's not, and they kind of make you feel guilty, try to at least. And then now I'm in this place where actually every decision I made, the fact that I stood my ground, I kept saying no, it was the right decision all along. I knew it. And it just goes to prove that we should always listen to our gut. Too often, and too many of us sometimes, just be like, kind of like maybe pave over, like, oh, okay, I'll just go along with it, and then everyone else is doing it. And then maybe like after we've done that thing we don't want to do, we're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done it. We're like, why did we do it? Why did we get peer pressured into doing it? And this is a far better feeling when, I've waited it out for years. I just had confidence in him, in his ability to speak one day. And he did, because I knew everything is about belief systems anyway. As long as he didn't have, a belief system that's telling him I can't speak, he was always going to speak. It's whenever we tell ourselves we can't do something, we can't, and then our mind listens to what we tell it, and it just says, yeah, I can't do it. And that's the fundamental sort of rule about existing in this reality. And one of the best things is that in class, he, out of everyone, his teachers told me this, and when we go in for, like, sometimes they invite you in for a morning to, like, look at the class, like, at what happens. He has his hand up almost every time trying to answer a question. There is nothing in his psychology that tells him he can't speak. He's got his hand up and he can speak, and he's confident to speak. He's confident about what he has to say. And that was always the one thing I wanted to protect. And I did. So yeah.